Hello, everybody. It's good afternoon. So my name is Gunnar Son, an associate professor at Geomatics Engineering Programs in the Lassonde School of Engineering, York University. It is my privilege and pleasure on behalf of the Geomatics Engineering Programs at York University to welcome you here today. So we very much delighted to have you with us to participate and share in our second, the GeoTalks virtual seminar series. Thanks for joining this meeting today. And that many of you have remotely attended from different places to this seminar series, especially during this very challenging pandemic period. And it serves as a reminder to us all just how important geospatial technology is. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the Geomatics Engineering Programs at York University. So Geomatics Engineering Programs at York University was founded 19 years ago. We will have a 20th birthday next year. So for almost 20 years in the past, many geomatics undergraduate and graduate students have been graduated through our program, who are now leaders in various fields of geomatics area as engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and educators. Also, our program has been largely contributed to geomatics research communities and industries by conducting innovative research projects for over the two decades. GeoTalks is a bi-weekly seminar series organized by our programs and the Canadian Institute of Geomatics Toronto branch, and also Geomatics student clubs at York University. This series will host industry leaders and entrepreneurs in geomatics. This is an opportunity to hear from industry leaders in geomatics who will introduce their cutting-edge geospatial technology through this seminar series. So I guess Kevin is here. So we're very much honored to have Dr. Kevin Lim with us today. And Kevin Lim is a founder and CEO of Lim Geomatics Incorporation. The company was founded in 2006 to commercialize Dr. Lim's and Ph.D. research in airborne lidar and its application to forest inventory, and has since grown to employ 20 staff across its two offices located in Ottawa and Calgary. Lim Geomatics was recently recognized as one of Canada's fastest growing companies with its inclusion on Canadian Business 2020 growth list, with its focus on building geospatial software and data to help forest companies be more efficient with their in-office and field operations. Lim Geomatics has emerged as an industry leader in the forest market with how it leveraged GIS, remote sensing, IoT, and AI to increase the bottom line for its forest customers in Canada, USA, and South Africa. So in this talk titled, Geomatics in Forestry, Dr. Lim will share his experience with his entrepreneurship journey that has spanned over the last 15 years. Dr. Lim received his PhD from Queen's University in 2006 and lives in Ottawa. So prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin. All right, can you share your screen?
Awesome, good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for joining this this webinar or guest lecture or GeoTalk, whatever we like to call it. So certainly it's a pleasure to join all of you, and thank you to Dr. Sohn for the invitation to speak with you. So I'm going to share with you today some of the things we do. I'm not going to go very technical in the weeds, and that's largely intentional. I want to tell you about what it is Lim Geomatics does and give you examples. I'm also going to take a bit of time near the end and talk maybe a little bit about entrepreneurship and offer some unsolicited tips, if you will, for those that might be on the call that are wondering about maybe starting your own business or doing something. As much as we're in this awkward time of being in a pandemic, you know, it's also a fantastic time for people to try different things since there's nowhere else to go. So but online and try different things. So a little bit about myself, as my bio said, I'm that kid that went to undergraduate studies at the University of Guelph, kind of was a tree hugger back in the day and not really sure what I wanted to do. Obviously coming from an Asian family, my father is very heavy in the technical side. I can't say going to university was my immediate priority, but let's just say I was voluntold by my strong-willed parents, and then some of you on the call may have a chuckle at that and know what I mean. So off I went to Guelph, environmental sciences, specifically as environmetrics, so math, stats, computer science for environmental sciences, and really I discovered GIS in my 4th year of undergraduate studies. That whisked me to the University of Waterloo, where I did my master's, and really kind of started honing my craft, if you want to call that, in GIS, and started dabbling in remote sensing. And then that largely whisked me to Queen's University, which then sent me down to Huntsville, Alabama, of all places. I was pulled in by MDA's mapping group to be involved with some of the R&D activities stateside. And then, as with anything, as much as I was trying to escape Ottawa and my parents and head west, somehow I'm back in Ottawa now. Family's here, and absolutely zero complaints. All right, so let's kick this talk off. So we're in a global pandemic. Many of you remember March timeframe, April timeframe, and things left, right, and center were flying off the shelves. So many of you remember one of the hot ticket items was toilet paper, of all things. I guess everybody wants to have ample amounts of toilet paper, and we can't survive without toilet paper. And I will connect these stories. So you may be wondering, well, what is this about? He's talking about forestry. Obviously, toilet paper and paper products are part of that forest market. Forestry is a big contributor to the GDP in Canada. In rural areas, smaller towns, often they're the main driver behind local economies. So this affects you in your everyday lives. For those that are fully on the pandemic mode, trying to do projects, whether it's building a deck, home construction, good luck earlier finding, and even still now finding lumber, right? Whether you're building a new fence, whether you're doing a deck. And why is that case? When we look at lumber futures, so really this is pricing on the markets. If we look back to that March, April timeframe, it wasn't a really pretty picture, right? We were about 300, below 300 per 1,000 board feet. And then when you look at September, we broke $1,000 per board feet. And so what a little yo-yo exercise here. So when you think about the price of lumber per se, it absolutely went crazy. So for those who have been holding stock in forest products, you would have killed it. So you might sit there and go like, well, how does geomatics fit into this world, from the manufacturing of toilet paper to even wood products in your clothing, to lumber products I mentioned, lumber, home construction. You'd be surprised at how pervasive forest products are in your daily lives, and things you may not even really truly consider. So one of the key things about our space, some might call it precision forestry. So McKinsey and Company, a big global consulting firm. For those interested, you can pull up their report. This was published maybe a couple years ago, 2 years ago or so. And really the idea here was them looking at, the forestry market, the sector, and looking at what's happening and where there are opportunities to introduce change. So nowadays, everything digital transformation is the latest buzzword. Back then maybe it wasn't as strong, but largely this is what they were driving at. Specifically, from their work, they're really looking at forestry. So a lot of people go, oh, forestry, like it's so easy. You got these blue collar guys living in middle of nowhere, cutting wood. How complicated could it be? Forestry is actually one of the most complicated spaces, I would argue, in the world. I would rather take sending a rocket to the moon than necessarily live in this forestry space. Again, hindsight's 2020, but it's very complicated. Often people are like, oh, just go look to mining. They have all the problems. mining that hole don't move, it's stationary. In the forestry context, we have equipment moving around, we got people, we've got mills that have really high tech gear in them, we have systems, the amount of billions of dollars that are moving around. It's a very complicated space, but historically it's a laggard in terms of how they operate. Believe it or not, there's still people I talk to now that are armed with paper and pencil, and they go out in the field, and that's how they collect data. So that might be shocking for some. So when we really look at this study around precision forestry, I've highlighted the areas where there'd be applications or relationships with geomatics in general. So the whole digital forest inventory. So as the word inventory implies, it's how much do you have where. So obviously, if you're managing, Canadians' great natural resources of forests, you need to know where they are, what's happening in them, what operations have taken place, what type of species are where, how big the wood is, how small the wood is, etc., so that you can put those into various types of forest management plans. You'll see keywords lidar. So dating myself, I started doing my PhD in 2000. I finished in 2006. I often joke, Dr. Sohn, I believe I saw Dr. Ko on the call as well. Like we're a different generation. We're almost like the prehistoric generation, if you will, dealing with really old technology. Whereas you flash forward now, and it's sometimes a world we don't even recognize in terms of new technologies constantly coming. Obviously, smartphones, right? There's reference there. So those who are rocking an iPhone 12 Pro, you got a lidar built in there going forward. How do you integrate information together? You'd be surprised to realize that there's data collected in the field that never comes back to the office. But having said that, you have workers that work 500 kilometers in the middle of bleeping anywhere that there is no cell signal. So a lot of us take for granted saying, well, just use a cell signal. Great. Let's use a satellite signal. Well, the pipe is so small that it's so cost exorbitant that it's challenging. So obviously with Musk, Starlink, and Telesat's low Earth orbit constellations, Amazon's, who you name it, the race for the low Earth orbit satellite space, there's opportunities to come. And drones and whatnot, and being proactive. And there's been some new satellites even this year that have launched to help with that aspect. So the work that has been happening, as even Dr. Sohn had mentioned, 19 years, with York University, like it's a movement, and things have changed significantly going forward. So what does Lim Geomatics do? So one of the things here is we often say, or I'll challenge people who are thinking about that entrepreneurship life, is to be able to articulate what it is you do. So really your mom and your dad should be able to understand what you're trying to pitch. So largely we describe it as we build geospatial software and data for forestry companies to help them be more efficient with their office and field operations. It's as simple as that. The closest thing to geomatics would be the word geospatial per se, but the idea here is we wanted a simple way to describe. And in terms of a pro tip, as I said throughout the presentation, I'll have a couple of these. As you're thinking about ideas you may have, or you're thinking of trying different ideas, it's like just remember to keep things very simple. Make sure that people around you can understand it. Sometimes it's not about describing the latest GNS technology and how great it is, and precision and accuracy and all that jazz. Really just got to be focused. Okay, so in terms of our approach, so I will get into more, how we do this and what technologies were used, but I thought it was important to share with you our approach that hasn't changed over time. So the various spaces we work with will be in oil and gas, agriculture, environment, and forestry. But one of the things we adopted or thought of early on was that data was just data, whether it was remote sensing, whether it's drone, fixed wing, satellite, whether it was IoT. Dr. Liang spoke 2 weeks ago on his company Sensor Up and the work they're doing there, whether it's telematics, whether GIS. We've always viewed data as just data. Until you translate, massage that data in some type of information product, something somebody can consume and do something with, we weren't quite convinced that the value proposition was there. And those information products can be maps, it can be analytics, dashboards, reports, etc. But we also took it one step forward. We also recognize that if you've got the information products and you have some people that just don't have the tools to leverage the full potential of that information product, then you might fail as well. So we focused early on in terms of web-based technologies and mobile-based technologies. Cloud, we were very early in terms of adoption. We started adopting cloud in 2008, 2009, so very, very early on. But again, it was the idea of scalability, elasticity, robustness, different factors. It wasn't because it was sexy that we're going to the cloud, as opposed to as a small organization. Why build something when we could buy a platform as a service and leverage that going forward? So another aspect I wanted to share was just our strategy, because it unifies, I think, for this presentation, what you're about to see and why you're going to see certain aspects. So the first piece is lidar forest inventory. So again, this is using laser-based remote sensing. You know, for many of you on the call, you're geomatics students, and I know for sure lidar is a part of that geomatics vocabulary. Nowadays, for the layperson, I say there's a little airplane that flies around and shoots these lasers really, really quickly, and we measure things on the ground, such as the height of trees. We can also penetrate the forest canopy to measure the ground. And by simply subtracting the two, we're able to get tree heights. But the premise here is it was a revolutionary technology. So again, to date myself, back in my days, we were less than a pulse per square meter. In terms of sampling intensity. Today, we're what, 400, 500, 800, 1,000 pulses per second, multi-wavelength, et cetera, single photon, Geiger mode versus linear mode. Like, times have changed. But the premise here is, how do you use this technology to create an inventory to describe what that forest asset looks like across the land base? We also knew, given the industry, that there's things moving around. There's people, there's equipment. Largely, if you've driven by a construction site, all those pieces of equipment, if you just move into the forest bush area, they apply. So whether a grader, a dozer to build roads, a feller buncher, which is like a tractor, but think of a big saw in the front, it's grabbing the tree and slicing it off, et cetera. All these machines are at play. So knowing what they're doing, where they are, what the performance of those assets are critical, whether from a scheduling or logistics, from just knowing whether you're profitable with that business, is important. We also knew that data itself is inherently spatial. So to try and treat it in a non-GIS world just didn't make sense to us. So we largely knew that enterprise GIS was critical. So we are an Esri business partner. So where we largely are closed source, less so open source. Most of the players we deal with in terms of customers, they're tier one, so large organizations, and just part and parcel, they're using enterprise level technology, which Esri GIS is, ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Pro. The other aspect is we then invested several millions of dollars to build our platform, and I'll show with you what that looks like. And the idea here is that you need all these pieces together to really realize value, because ultimately what we were targeting was being able to focus on business intelligence and analytics. So we weren't interested in this data set, this LiDAR data set, or this spaceborne data set is, petabytes of data. Who cares? Nowadays, back then, there's an issue. Nowadays, we can handle that data volume, no question. The real questions people are interested is examples of how do I optimize my truck fleet efficiently? How do I know how much volume is and where I should send it for maximum dollars per se? So again, we're focused on business level questions, not maybe getting caught in the weed. So what does our forestry geospatial platform look like? It's a collection of web and mobile tools. So we're a technology company first and foremost, even though we've been in the forestry space for 15 years, we're a tech company first and foremost. And the idea here is that if we kind of look from 9 o'clock all the way to 3 o'clock, we have things such as acquiring LiDAR data. We don't own our own sensors, but we partner with various organizations. We process that data to create these inventories. They call them enhanced forest inventories, and I'll show you what they look like in a moment. And then we build decision support tools to leverage that. We have Prism. It's a mobile timber cruising application. So the idea is, believe it or not, in a lot of jurisdictions, people still go out and measure individual trees because they use those in statistical roll-ups to be able to tell different parties how much is there, and then conversely, what the value of that particular area is. UpTracker around 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, the FPDAT2, these are fleet telematics solutions. So the idea is we can track pieces of machine anywhere and quantify their performance to figure out ultimately, are they productive or not. Around the 1 o'clock, we have UpTracker for transport. This is our trucking solution. And again, the novelty is not in where that truck's being, as opposed to, if we have all these data points, how can we mine them to address or answer some of those BI and business analytics questions? In the center is Stratus. That's our forest management and data analytics solution. And the idea here is that you have the opportunity to amalgamate, unify all these different data points to then drive other types of insights and intelligence. If we look at the timber harvesting supply chain, so many of you on the call, I'm going to assume, aren't forestry or may never have taken a forestry course ever. Just for reference, even though we deal with forestry a lot, forestry was my second worst class in undergrad. Zoology was the worst. Zoology bad, but forestry it conflicted with my workout time at the gym. That's my excuse. So it's kind of funny how things have come full circle, that it's become this area that we largely exclusively focus in. But the ideas are different phases. You got the felling one, which is you're cutting the trees. You got the yarding, you're bringing different logs together. You're processing. So often that tree, when you think of that 2x4 or a piece of wood product that you have, it's like, how do you get to that point? Well, you have a mill that's processing and pumping it out. Before you even do that, there's often machines in the field that are actually taking the branches off, taking the bark off, and then in some cases processing at roadside. Then you got to get it out of Dodge, right? You got to get it in the middle of Timbuktu back to the mill. So you got that transport component. And then ultimately when it gets unloaded at the mill, we kind of wipe our hands because we don't deal with the mill technology, where there's stuff like lasers that are scanning that log to figure out, to optimize how many of what things they can pull out of it, and off they go. There's drawing. It's actually quite a fascinating space. So ultimately, what we're showing here in color code is the various products in our forestry geospatial platform and which phases they're actually targeting. So what do we do with lidar, airborne lidar data? As I said, I'm not going to go into the weeds. I'm happy to field questions near the end. I'll make sure there's enough time there. But largely, we're taking that massive point data set and making maps. These are maps that are 20 by 20 or 20 by 20 or 25 by 25 meter pixels, and we're telling our foresters what's there. So this is just a map describing piece size. It could be a map of how much biomass or carbon. For those in the carbon economy, it could be how much volume, what's the average diameter. These are all metrics that foresters are interested. But the idea here is that it's a web application you can visualize and see what things look like across the land base. You can also run analytics on it. So again, the idea here is with the web-based decision support tools, you can do simple things like draw a polygon and then ask the system to tell you how much of what you got in that particular polygon. So I won't delve into the nuance or the details necessarily of forestry, but in the second panel, you'll see metrics. And largely, this is what people are interested in, just that summary, right? They're not focused on what was the pulse rate of that LiDAR sensor? What LAS format was it in? What's the accuracy and precision? They're just interested in, like how big's the wood? How tall is it? What are things that input variables I need in my planning? Now, we do apply LiDAR for UAV, but again, to put it in context, this is where, having come from the research space, I can relate. Research is cool, but at the end of the day, there's also a pragmatic component of it. So while it's great to fly UAVs, obviously in Canada, there's some flights that are now going beyond visual line of sight, some folks testing that out. The land bases I deal with are often 1 million to 2 million hectares. So to put it in context, if I had an aircraft flying LiDAR for 1 million hectares, it's probably 20 days of flight alone going forward. So these are big areas that, as great as UAV sounds, they may not be as feasible as in their current incarnations and in the regulatory framework, but there's interest. So this is just a data set collected with a LiDAR sensor on a UAV. And the idea is, how can we do individual tree extraction segmentation? I know Dr. Sohn and Dr. Ko have spent many moons or hours dealing in this space. And at the end of the day, we're often in a natural environment. So again, there's scenarios where a lot of researchers will say, yeah, this works. But I'll talk later a little on in terms of some of the challenges. Well, I guess not later on, immediately after this slide. So where are there really R&D opportunities? Species ID and mapping is still the holy grail. So as much as researchers say, oh yeah, we can do this and stuff, when you put it to that operational context, outside of the lab, if you will, the accuracy and precisions aren't necessarily there, whether you're using LiDAR or whether you're using multispectral or hyperspectral. The individual tree extraction and segmentation is still the holy grail as well. So this is the piece, is that In forestry, it's not the simple, every stick looks the same. There's nothing below it. You know, there's things such as thinning, removing trees that you want to take them out so they don't draw resources for the other trees that are flourishing per se. Well, you often can't see those things. Again, that lab to operational world can be challenging. So often when you hear people say, "Oh, my individual tree technology is 95% accuracy," has a 95% accuracy, and you kind of unpack that and you say, "Okay, well, what's the species? Like, it does species? Oh yeah, okay, what species do you target? Oh, hardwood and conifer. Okay, that's not species to me, that's groupings, right? And then when you start unpacking it to individual tree species level, and these are like sugar maple, black spruce, you know, yellow birch, things you see outside your window per se, you know, you often end up in that 67% range. So it is a complex space that, yes, in certain conditions it works very well, but often not. There are challenges. So this is an area that I find fascinating because, again, York University, lots of other universities, geomatics programs have targeted on this, and I'm not quite sure it's really hit that particular space. So one of the pro tips around this as you're thinking about your research is, and maybe looking at commercializing some of that research, is we often shoot for the moon, right? We're going to do this. Sometimes it's good just to pick a very small thing and just focus on that and craft a story or create a story from that and test the waters, if you will. Mobile mapping, this is like a Geosystems BLK to go. So the team there were kind enough to lend us some data there and collect things and whatnot. So there's opportunities to collect this. And so again, different platforms, different instruments per se that are available to do different things. And the idea is how can you leverage that and translate that to information. So obviously in geomatics programs, there's lots of technology that are at play. So within our shop, we'll dabble with things. We've dabbled with augmented reality and virtual reality several years ago. So this is really a Microsoft HoloLens that's displaying some LiDAR data collected from the field. And the cool thing here is it's a different way of interacting with the data set. So yeah, we can look at 3D in the computer, but the idea is, what do you do with this? Well, how do you derive value, create value from this product? So the ability for foresters, such as in the left in our office there, to look at things, point at things, maybe collaborate together if there's something, whether there's an environmental spill, an oil spill, or something, you know, to collaborate together is a very, very powerful concept. There's jurisdictions in Australia and New Zealand that will fly drone lidars, collect the data, and then do all their measurements in virtual reality. Because some areas are really hard to get to. I know when I was in Australia, you know, we eat blackberries, and then the joke was, well, how bad can blackberry thickets be? Until they took me out to the field and I look, and it's literally a wall, and you would not have a chance getting through without getting scratched to death or even getting through, right? So this is where it was a classic use. It made sense to use technology to try and bypass some of those impediments of doing field work. So there's lots of opportunities here, but the real question is, how do you connect a problem to this particular technology to drive things forward? On the AR and VR side, I can't say we found that sweet spot yet. We've dabbled, and maybe we're ahead of the time for what the market is ready to bear in forestry. We're not too sure. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and just talk about digital transformation. So really, in terms of the technologies we use, truthfully, every single buzzword is at play except blockchain. So that's one that we just have not gone down the path. But if you're thinking machine learning, deep learning within the AI space, yes, we're doing that for species classification, for forest inventory modeling, for tree extraction, no differently than anybody else. When you think about big data, absolutely as a function of trucks, satellites, UAVs, LiDAR, multispectral, hyperspectral, et cetera. We're dealing with different sources, with data coming at different velocities of different variety, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing I want to hone here is that often when we hear about digital transformation, we immediately just think about technology. I built this new thing and thus I can help with digital transformation. And that's far from the truth. The reality is that there's a people component, there's a technology component, and there's a processes component. And we live this at Lim Geomatics every single day. And truthfully, from our inception, where we've always had the best technology, and it has not been the problem. The problem is people who may not trust your technology, right? People who are like, are you sure LiDAR can measure height? Yes, I'm pretty sure it can measure height. Like that ship sailed a long time ago, but you have people out there, I don't want to call it disinformation, but have different viewpoints. So really when we think about digital transformation as we work forward with our products in Geomatics, we had to think about all these aspects. So one of the things we've developed is Op Tracker. So this is a cross-platform mobile application. So when I say by cross-platform, we're coding, but we're in a Xamarin world. So this is where we wanted to have one code base. We didn't want to have three for iOS, Android, or our Windows tablets. So this often requires, developers with a comp sci background because it's more complicated than writing Python scripts or whatnot. But the point here is we've got one code base that we can deploy natively across the board. And really what we're doing here is tracking where machines are. And you can see in this slide here, just those blue lines are where those bunches are going within the block. So every operator is assigned a block and we'll buffer out the data. We'll take GIS data, LiDAR data, push it down. And the idea is they can work in the field completely remotely with no connection, but know where to go. In areas where there's steep terrain, be able to know where maybe they shouldn't go. Areas of sensitivity, whether from an environmental point of view or some other business factor or regulatory point of view, then they can symbolize that and see that on the map as they're operating and know where they can go, where they shouldn't go. They can create GeoNotes, something as simple as, what's happening in the field, being able to collect that data once and then repatriate that data back to the organization. Once that data is in our cloud, so everything we do is pretty much all cloud-based. The idea is as a manager, you're not as interested in cutting wood, you're interested in broader analytics such as, we've got a block here, what % complete is that harvesting done? So in this case, we're saying 80%, we've got 3 contractors. And then the key thing here is they're interested in productive machine hours. So this is their productivity measure that they're using to calculate utilization. So obviously, if Dr. Sohn is out there and he's lazy and he punches his time card and says, oh, I work 12 hours, we can say, hey, Dr. Sohn, it's like, well, you only work 8 hours and we know exactly when you stopped. And then thus we're not going to pay you for those rates and we need adjustments. Or as a company, they have rate models, what they pay out. And so the idea is how can you use data to drive those decisions, right? That buzzword today, data-driven decision making. So this affords them, it provides them the data points there that they can do all sorts of analyses. The key here is that there's always a big brother component. So you really got to focus on how do you create value for both the people who are using the technology in the field and the forestry companies. The Op Tracker also extends to the fleet telematics side. So these are trucks for a client out east, and the idea here is that we know where those vehicles are going. Again, the value in the XY is important. You need it, but it's not critical. What these people and what I'm showing you on this slide is they're interested in the cycle time. They want to know that within a 24-hour, where did this truck go? How much time did they spend loading? Right? Because I may have said on average it takes X 3/4 of an hour and we're paying out for that. And then what happens if a contractor is now averaging, an hour and 15 minutes? They're not getting paid the same amount. So then there's hard discussions that have to be had. So the idea here is we can answer questions such as what's the load time? So that truck gets to the block in the bush and the logs are loaded on. How long does that take? How long does it take for them to travel to the mill? Is there queuing? Like if that mill is delayed or there's how long are they just sitting there idling? Once they're in the mill going unloaded, what's the unload time, etc. This particular company has a port component. So what they produce actually gets put on a ship and gets sent to India for further processing for textile, for clothing production per se. So they actually have a component there. So here's another example again of how the geomatics is at play, because we have dongles that are talking to cellular networks that are pulling GNSS data, that is caching data while there's no cell signal. It's then pushing into the cloud, and there's automated pipelines that are kicking off to analyze the data to produce daily, weekly, monthly reports for these particular companies. And ultimately, what they're after, like this is my point, that when you really ask them and say, what do you need? How does science, the geomatics work translate to what you want? Can you produce an Excel graph for me? And you're like, wow, it's like we're doing such great innovative work, and this is the gold mine. A graph that's showing truck productive machine hours. What happened the last 4 weeks versus what's happening the current week? What's our target rate, right? Also, in terms of unloading time, the same thing. You know, what happened the last 4 weeks? What's happened currently, and what are our targets, so that they can figure out if there's anything of concern to them. So it's fascinating from that point of view when you're thinking about what you study. It's obviously critical, but what the customer or the client wants to consume can be very drastically different. We also discovered working with him, because we have so many data points, is that if you've been on a ATV or any trail for that matter, you get the ruts in it. And at the end of the day, you can only go so fast as a logging truck. And these are big trucks. The idea here is the data points tell us where there's problem areas in their road networks. So the idea is on the left, we can see a lot of yellow points, red points. And this affects their rate models, because they're assuming that a truck is going to travel at this speed, it's going to take this amount of time. And so they can proactively even maybe predict where there's going to be problem areas, and then send those graders out to fix the road. And then through time, on the right side of the graph, just watch the data points go back to green. Just something that came about by having the data. To carry on that discussion, you know, the digital transformation, there's still quite a bit of paper. You know, when that truck pulls up to the loader. So again, a loader is grabbing a bunch of logs, putting it on the truck. Right now, there's a paper ticket that's exchanged. So some dude has to get out of the truck, you know, goes through, there's safety issues, right? Because it's a big, heavy equipment. So the idea here is we're tasked with a challenge to say, all right, we got a truck that's approaching a loader. We built technology so that they can talk via Wi-Fi. And the idea is the truck then says, hey, I'm here, give me a load slip or a ticket per se. And via satellite, we also transmit that digital load slip into our cloud. And then they also receive via Wi-Fi that digital load slip. And this is not sexy, people. This is like, you know, some barcode information, you know, other types of attributes. And the idea is that then truck drives to the mill carrying that. And if they get stopped, they have the ability to show that e-slips or digital load slips. And then in case all things fall apart, because inevitably something could go wrong, we want a backup that you can still print that paper ticket. We don't want a delay in the actual business of forestry. Once they actually get to the mill gate, you know, the truck enters, they got to get on a scale. It's actually pretty cool. And then they walk into a shed and enter their information from the slips. And then the scale, industrial scale, measures what's on the truck. So the idea here is if you know the weight, you scale in, and then when you leave empty and scale out, the difference is the actual weight or the volume per se. But what we were automating was, again, in the COVID-19 world and business process improvement, we didn't want the truck driver to get out of the truck and go into the shed and start touching things and doing different things. We wanted that person bum in the seat to be able to trigger that. So we introduced UI automation technology to actually control that software so that they can go ahead, transmit, scale is great. They go to the outbound, do the same thing, and then they're off to the races going forward. So really interesting space, because we had to introduce some Bluetooth low energy beacon technology to figure out which scale they're actually on, or maybe refine that level of information. And then we pull it together. You know, in terms of Stratus, this is our forest management system and data analytics platform. And the idea is all this data points can come in. We can do very sophisticated planning, costing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what's the validation for us? Back to McKinsey, just maybe a month ago, they published a new piece about data and the new wave of forestry productivity. And the general premise here is data, data, data. If you don't have the data, you can't really drive any decision making. And so one of their key points is, as we think about this equipment, is that at the end of the day, it's probably its overall equipment effectiveness is only 40%. So the terrible analogy for the people who know me, I always come up with terrible analogies. It's like saying, hey, you bought a Tesla, assuming you could buy one. I don't have a Tesla, and it's got a battery, and right away someone says, you know what, even though it's 100%, you're only allowed to access 80% of it. Oh, and then by the way, in terms of you're charging it, you can only charge it between these hours, and then if you don't, then there's a degradation. And then at the same time, it's like where you want to go, there's timing restrictions, etc. But the point being here is, for a piece of an asset that you spent often $500,000 on, you're really only using it 40% of the time. So just even bumping that up by 10%, but 2% for that matter, translates to massive dollars, massive, and not like pennies. Like, these are thousands of dollars. And when you scale that up across hundreds of machines, you're into the $1 million ranges in terms of efficiency. So the idea here is a lot of the technology built is meant to address this. So it's validated our strategy. So that's really a high-level overview of some of the things that we do. And I did want to take a pause to kind of maybe talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and then my journey there. So I'm not sure if this video is gonna come through on the audio, but I'll see. And of course, nothing really works well. I'm gonna bypass it. So for those interested, just look up every business video. Is it magically gonna work now? Click. All right, we'll skip it. So look up every business video on YouTube.
Hi, my name's Greg, co-founder, CEO, president.
Okay, I'm going to skip that. But you can look it up, watch it on your time. And the point being there is have a laugh, because every single buzzword, and when you look at other businesses, the premise here is that often what we do is we watch Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, we adopt these things, and not to say there's anything bad with it, but you end up blending things and kind of getting kind of meshed out in the wash, if you will. So a couple of tips I just wanted to share with you in terms of my experiences today, because guaranteed there's probably someone on this call who has basically said, yeah, it's like, I might want to try and do something. So the first thing is I challenge you to be laser focused. How many times do you watch Dragon's Den where someone says, oh, it's like, there's a bajillion smartphones out there. If we only get 1% of them, then it equals this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, bad tactic. It's terrible. Being focused is sometimes counterintuitive. Focusing all your efforts on one thing and making sure you're doing that well and bringing that market can really pay dividends. And that's something even within my organization we're challenged with often to remain laser beam focused. Keep it simple. Don't buy, like there's a saying out there. A lot of coaches, mentors and stuff will say, people don't buy products, they buy people. So the point here is no matter how good your widget is, it really doesn't matter. It creates a source of debate in the end, because no matter what people say, oh, but it's like, I've got the best product, I've got features this other competitor doesn't have. It takes a while to really understand this. And the best story I have is that now when we sell to customers, really it has nothing to do with the product. They trust the Lim Geomatics brand to innovate and solve their problems, to be good citizens, good partners, and solve their problems. That often it's a leap of faith. So even if we're missing a feature, it doesn't matter, right? It's not build it and they will come type of scenario. But the key thing here is you really need to keep things simple, stupid. Because truthfully, from our side, a lot of people are saying, oh, it's like forestry, what's the big deal? I still meet people using clamshell flip phones, to put it in context. And there may be some of you on the call going like, I don't even know what the guy's talking about, a clamshell flip phone, but there is some old school technology still at play. So when you start talking about, oh, just wait till 5G comes around, or, Starlink, right? It's like, great, like you're talking to a wall per se. Great comment here. If you look at Seth got in here, lots of comments, don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. So really this is about innovating to solve a problem. Often when, again, I've been in there, commercializing signs, flopped many times miserably, tried different things, made foolish decisions. But at the end of the day, the idea was to keep pushing forward. But it always comes back to helping somebody. That's the tenet. So no matter how great your technology is, if you can't articulate that problem you're trying to solve in the most simplest way, it really doesn't matter per se. It doesn't matter if this OEM GNSS board talks to 4 constellations. At the end of the day, some schmo is just going to ask you, is it accurate? Is it good enough? Right, versus all the details. So again, part of this is just to name drop different things so that you on the call can take that. I know there's a young people, you guys consume technology and information like no other generation. So you can take a look at some of these. The other thing is with entrepreneurship, a lot of people think it's a walk in the park, right? You watch the media, it's like, oh, you got this new unicorn. Oh, it's great. But the stories that often are not told are the ones where there's many battle scars. I often joke, I have so many arrows in my back. It's crazy. But the idea here is when you're starting off, you have to wear multiple hats. And so you got to grind, like you got to work. So if you're not willing to put in, super long hours in a day, it may not be the path for you. It's really not a straight path. But if you're somewhere out there who's curious, tenacious, never takes a no, and you're willing to just give it a go, it's a fantastic path going forward. this is one I always impart on everybody, like network, network, network. It's like, it's an, everyone says it, and then people are like, oh, I'm kind of shy. I'm kind of introverted. I don't know what to say, whatnot. It doesn't matter. Just throw yourself out there. The true leaders out there will see you, will sense it, and they will pull you in. They will create that opportunity. Often when I'm out and I see that shy person, I will go out there and talk to them, and then introduce them to other people, because I know I've been there. It's hard. But the key thing is, you never know who you're going to meet. When you're looking for validation, you're looking for ideas, and you're looking for help, the best way of doing it is just getting out there and talking with people. Because at the end of the day, one thing I can say for sure is that for any entrepreneur who's gone through the trenches, had many battles, we're willing to help. We're willing to impart knowledge and jumpstart you, if you will, so that you can try and avoid some of the mistakes or lessons learned that some of us have gone through. The other aspect is you got to be a salesperson, right? It invokes the used car salesperson, but truthfully, it's everybody is a salesperson. You need to be able to describe what you're doing in simple terms. You need to be able to get people excited about it. You need communication skills to be able to listen to the other side and interpret what they're saying, or maybe anticipate what some of their challenges are, especially when you're dealing with complicated geomatics technology. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually quite a fascinating space that often we're not trained on, truthfully. I think every university student should go through a course on sales in general, because there's a lot of life skills that come along with that. As I wind down, some of the key things is a lot of people are saying, oh, it's just, the glory, I raise money and whatnot. So Lim Geomatics is still bootstrapped. It's intentional. Raising, investment dollars is almost a full-time job on its own. And you can get caught chasing the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, only to be rejected lots of times, or struggle with that. Largely, we've just focused on innovating, doing things quickly, testing the market as quickly. But one of the key things here, I believe, there's the ex-chairman or executive chairman, previous CEO of maybe IBM, and really the comment was, growth and comfort cannot exist together. And so the idea here is, if you're scaling, you're doing things, it's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be new challenges, and that's part and parcel of this journey per se. So lastly, some of you on the call may be like, yeah, but ... And I always come back to Nike and their slogan, just do it. As I've talked with other people and young minds, it's always, yeah, but this, yeah, but that. What better way to learn than doing it? A lot of people, if there's some older folks on the call, it's like, more mature people can't do this, whatever. Everyone has their opinions. Yes, it's easier when you're younger because you like ramen noodles and boiling water. When you get older, no, that ain't happening. But so lifestyles change, priorities change. But when you're younger, you're just more flexible. So it's a lot easier to try something, especially if you're living in mom and dad's basement per se. So I often challenge people, it's like, just do it. It's like every time you're starting to make excuses, it's like, just try it. It's like, you got nothing to lose, in all honesty, especially during this time. So 3 winding slides down for concrete things. If you want to learn more, get your thinking kind of challenge, grab April Dunford. She's from Toronto. It's about product positioning. So really, how do you describe what you're doing in a way that resonates and that can drive your marketing activities, your sales activities, and other types, even your website design for that matter. Very easy to read. So I've talked with April. She's great, very level-headed, just lots of experience, very successful in this space. So I highly recommend the book. And as a joke, no commissions received for endorsing this book, but it's a great one. Second, around the salespeople, 2 classic books here, the Sales Playbook and Question-Based Selling. How do you sell? You want to be sold how you would want to buy. And so often it's good questions. When you talk to that person who's really selling you something and they understand your pain points, you really have a better connection with them. So the last one I'll say is for you young generations out there on your phone is check out Dan Martell. So he's got a lot of podcasts, but one which is super cool, Escape Velocity. I check it out all the time when I'm going my walks, put a podcast on and just zone out. Just so much you can learn, like so much, things you haven't even thought about going forward. And I take these lessons across the board and bring them into the Lim Geomatics business. So back to come full circle, as with any presentation, you're supposed to start with something and bring it back to bear. So when you think about geomatics and forestry, how do we get to this point where that stick of 2x4 is made? Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you appreciate that, wow, there's a lot to it. But more importantly, gee whiz, wouldn't you have loved to have bought in at that low end and sold out at the top end there? Wouldn't that have been great to have some predictive capabilities there? And then lastly, to kind of full circle, when we think about toilet paper, I always joke on this one because it's a salient point. Could you apply geomatics with everything I've shown you with what Lim Geomatics does to do predictive AI so that you can be proactive, know when some of these high bursts of demands are coming, adjust your workforce, your logistics, your supply chains to be able to respond, so that if people wanted toilet paper for like, I don't know how many 48 things of toilet paper you got to buy from Costco, hey, knock yourself out, buy 20, 50. It's like those shelves are completely full and organizations benefit from that. So that's me in a nutshell. So thanks very much for your time. Hopefully you found the presentation interesting in terms of how we're applying geomatics to forestry, learned a bit about forestry itself, and a couple tips around entrepreneurship. So I'll stop there, Dr. Sohn, and pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Excellent presentations. I already received a few questions. And one of the questions is about your entrepreneurship. And with regards to your strategy and the various layers, did you develop from the inner to the outer circle, or did you implement all of them from the start?
Yeah, no, great question. So it was from the inner outwards. So part of that, when we think about that digital transformation with the people, are they ready for that change? The technology, we had to build things out in the processes. So even if we had it all at the get-go, based on those three pillars, people were just not ready to embrace it. So it's almost like a staged approach that you got to step through. So today we have all those circles in action. So really often I describe it, it's in my mind as the CEO of the company, I'm always playing chess, but I have about 57 boards in my head right now of different things you're trying, right? And you're adjusting as you go. But you got to take steps. You got to take a baby step. You can't get caught in analysis paralysis and figure out how many rings do I have to have? Is it 2? Is it 5? As opposed to just pick one and do it, and then learn from it, and then just iterate as you go.
I see. Thank you. And then the second question, I think from Ilya, is if you were to do this all over again, and what would you do differently?
Oh, great question. Truthfully, the way I answer that is there wouldn't be anything I would do differently because every entrepreneur's journey is unique. There's things, had I done, it would have maybe helped, but then I wouldn't have learned different things. So I think if I was to look at it, it would be drinking some of my own medicine and doing the uncomfortable and networking a little bit more. So by default, believe it or not, I'm an introvert. So after a day, I can pretend I'm an extrovert, but introverts at that point, at the hotel at 8 p.m., it's like, don't talk to me. Hotel doors closed. It's like, I'm zapped. I need to recharge type of scenario. But I think it would be on the network side. It's like meeting people, right? You always think you're doing something new and no one's ever done it. And for the most part, somebody has done it. So it's probably to that coaching, that mentorship side, finding someone to guide you and just being hungry and leveraging all those resources you can possibly find.
I see. Well, I think the extended question is, how many people did you initially start at your company, Lim Geomatics? Did you have one person specialize in one thing, or was everybody involved equally?
Yeah, so I was the founder. So the company started in 2006. I was its sole employee. Our first employee beyond me came on in 2011. He's still with us now as a director of GIS and growing and flourishing and whatnot. And so largely it was around 2011 when we started scaling. So we'll continue to scale. With it comes opportunities and challenges. You got to deal with people, equipment. And so at the start, yeah, I wore every single hat. I know how to do my books. I know how to do accounting. I know how to drive our Salesforce CRM. I know how to do everything. I don't do it well anymore. So at some point you got to pick what you're good at. Again, laser focus on that, execute, and do it well, and then build a team. And you can't do it alone. That's the key thing. So, another piece, Kevin Lim Geomatics, maybe if I go back and say, if I changed something, maybe I wouldn't have called the company Lim Geomatics. Maybe I would have chose something other than my last name, but again, technical person, not so creative back then. So.
Right. The technical questions, which platform do you use for processing and data crunching?
Yeah, great question. So as I said, it's because I came from a technical background. Originally, a lot of our data processing pipelines were written by myself. Nowadays, very Esri centric. We are evolving more to the cloud. So things like Azure Data Factory and other types of technologies. And I'm sure through time, something else is going to come that makes our lives easier. So the idea here is we're going to iterate, but definitely a lot of enterprise GIS technology at play. And it doesn't have to be shiny, right? It doesn't have to be this thing with that cool interface. It has to work for us. So do we use remote sensing software? Not as much. Like a lot of stuff will be built ourselves to work the way we need it to work.
I see. I think the one question's from one of my colleagues, and Costas, I think you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So his question is, geomatics is often, is a little hard to sell, even though we do exciting things, right? So you mentioned about geomatics many times, and do you have any advice for us on how to market our discipline in a program to the youth and the public general?
Yeah, so I've been in a great question, Costa. So I've been involved in discussions with people, and honestly, geomatics, GIS, geospatial, I swear it's the only sector where there's consistently an identity crisis in terms of who we are. Other sectors, spaces, you don't see, oh, what does this mean? Truthfully, for me, my philosophy is you got to tell the stories. We don't do as good of a job telling our success stories. And so by default, it's not resonating with the younger minds to come. So this comes back to truthfully positioning. What's the value proposition of geomatics? Yes, we're horizontal in nature, but when you start telling those really cool stories about how geomatics are used to, I don't know, save elephants in Africa, like a colleague friend, Dr. Jake Walls involved with, right? And you start building these stories, it becomes a very powerful message. I think for a lot of times when you hear geomatics engineering, the first thing you hear is probably engineering, maybe less so geomatics, and that probably steers a group of people away, right? So it's like, how do you just make the focus on geomatics? Do it by stories, do it by experiences and whatnot. So I think there's way around that, but certainly questions around who are we? You're going on year 20, right? Like obviously there's successes per se. So how do you build those right stories that resonates with that target segment of the demographic? So, and ask the people on the call, right? These are students that have signed up. So what better way to use that brain trust to figure out how you evolve that story going forward?
That's good ideas. And using your technology methods, how can we use forest management to ensure our forest practice are sustainable?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because there is a preconceived notion that, oh, it's like forestry is raping and pillaging Mother Earth, and that's really far from the truth. The analogy I often use is that when you drive by an agricultural field, does it evoke those same emotions, those same connotations that, oh, we're destroying Mother Earth because we're harvesting the wheat and whatnot? The scale of forestry, the operations is greater. So when there's a big clear cut, you see it. But the reality is, from a stewardship point of view and remediating, forestry is a science that's been around for a long time. So from an environmental factor, it's like when you strip away the noise or the misinformation, things grow back. And you only look at the Canadian landscape in terms of things and how it's managed to understand that foresters are actually, I would argue, one of, if not the best stewards of Earth's natural resources in terms of trees. So I think there's an education component in that in terms of that question.
The person who made these questions about whether you hire, are you hiring now? So maybe we can ask him to contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're preparing for a round hiring, truthfully. So again, pro tip is everybody's looking for a job. My neighbor next door is looking for a job. Like it's a hard time right now for people to look for work. So the key things is like you got to find a way to stand out, right? In terms of your resume, your portfolio, your storytelling. You know how many cover letters I get of like, "Hi, Dr. Lim. Here's my application. Thank you." Name. It's kind of like, wow, great per se, but it's not really creating some excitement out there. So definitely, yeah, we'll be looking for some developers. So if you got some mad dev skills or you're hungry or a quick learner, keep your eye out. There'll be some stuff coming out on our side, and even just on some more engineering, working with some hardware and testing and stuff. We'll have a couple new roles coming out probably in the next couple weeks, truthfully. So
Okay. So can we share your email to the group?
yeah, absolutely. It's just my first name, Kevin, at limgeomatics.com. So feel free to reach out with any questions. And again, pro tip, please don't write, "Hi, I'm looking for a job. Will you hire me?" Probably not going to work that well, right? So again, but feel free to reach out with any questions. Always happy, as I said, to help and provide insight and whatnot. So
I see. So we, keep receiving the questions. We're slightly over the time reserved, and I think we have two more questions. Will be okay, Kevin?
yeah, absolutely, for sure.
So the one question is again a little technical things, and how you see the role of unmanned vehicle and or unmanned ground vehicle for forest management and application. Still, do you see any potential and
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two. So definitely, one of the groups that we work with is called FP Innovation. So they're a nonprofit research organization for the forestry sector, and forestry 4.0. Nowadays, I don't know if it's 4.0, 5.0, 10.0, or like I don't know what point 0. But that autonomous component is an area they're actively researching, whether it's truck platooning, whether it's autonomous bunchers. The other way I answer it is if you have an inkling in your bone that you're kind of nervous about semi-autonomous cars, it's got doors, 4 tires, you might be a little bit more worried about a gigantic excavator with a diamond saw about, well, I can't even put it on my screen. It's like huge spinning that can cut multiple trees like in a second. That kind of makes me nervous, but at the same time, there's nobody out there except deer, Bambi, and other people of that nature. But yes, absolutely, it's an area, and it's fascinating because as workforces age, there's less people who want to go out into the bush and do these types of jobs. When TMX is being built, a lot of people are getting sucked into the pipeline work and not available to other sectors. So that autonomy is going to come. But what's interesting is that understanding the problem, the value proposition. So we've been truck platooning with 2 trucks, following each other. One's autonomous, maybe both are autonomous. At the end of the day, there's studies that have crunched the economies of that and said, you're really you're not really saving that much by platooning from various factors. So again, devil's in the detail, but to the question around autonomy, it's everywhere. The question is going to just be how do you, just like in the commercial cars, how do you safeguard the workforce if you're going to go fully autonomous? Maybe it's kind of more of an RPAS, a remote piloted kind of concept where someone might be in this luxurious gaming chair and driving this $500,000 machine with that. I don't know, but it's actively being researched right now.
So what is the scale of your clients in typical, like a small clients or large organizations?
For the most part, when we do big data acquisitions around, so mostly it's LiDAR, airborne LiDAR, linear mode LiDAR, infrared, laser, nothing like the multispectral LiDAR or the single photon or Geiger mode LiDAR. They're larger tier 1 companies, so big integrated forestry companies. Just simply, even though the value is understood, they can justify the cost easier. Again, digital transformation, the people, the technology, processes. The smaller organizations, even though they may like the technology, the people and the processes aren't quite ready to adopt that particular change. So they're just not ready, even if they can justify that, a case in point is there's times we talk with customers, best scenario, it's like, Kev, money's no object. Okay, so are we going to fund the project? No. We don't have someone to project manage the project, so we're not going to fund the project. But you have the money to do oh yeah, we got the money to do the project. We just don't have someone to project manage it. And it's like, I'll give you a project manager, right, if that gets it. And so again, sometimes it's not just about the technology there.
I think the last question is very good for closing. So why you decided to be entrepreneurs? What is your biggest motivation?
Yeah, so I've never walked the path everyone's walked. Truthfully, I'm not sure why that is. So again, being a kid from immigrant parents, it started back from wanting to buy things, and because in my household there's no allowance. It was like, do your homework and like be a good Chinese son type of scenario. So I was delivering newspapers. I was selling ice cream, at a young age. Like my delivery walk is like 3 hours every day. But hey, Air Jordans are bleeping expensive, so you gotta do a lot of walking to get them. I've worked at Timmy's, I've worked at McDonald's, love McDonald's, the processes at play, learning those systems and standardization, how key it was. Worked at bars, learned all the bad habits that come with bars as well. Did consulting in the federal government. In university, I had to keep consulting to pay for school, right? So maybe to some extent it's necessity, but at the end of the day, I think for entrepreneurs, it's just part of your DNA. So I kind of look at the world differently all the time. From a young age, it was always, my dad was a civil servant. So it was always like, oh, great. It's like, when I retire, I can do all these things. And I was always like, why would I wait till I'm 65 to do fun things and travel? It's like, I want to do it now while I'm abled. I'm not sure I'm going to be abled and whatnot. So again, I've just kind of looked at things a little bit differently, but it's also a blessing and a curse. The curse part is that because I look at the world differently, I'm always trying to solve everybody's problems. It's like there's a problem there. It's like I can probably do something and help and whatnot. And so sometimes it's hard to turn it off. But largely for me, it comes back to my Nike slogan for those that are thinking about it. Do I want to be an entrepreneur? It's the wrong question. It's just do it. Take that idea, try it out. You'll be able to answer that question down in your careers. But at the very least, it's you don't want to look back and look at things. But truthfully, as I talk more about it, it was probably travel was a big component. Doing grad school, doing consulting, hey, wouldn't it be great if you're Dr. Sohn's student to get him to pay you to go to Greece and Italy for 2 weeks backpacking trip? In case my PhD supervisor, Dr. Trites, is listening or will listen at some point, thanks, Dr. Trites, because that's what I did. So seeing the world, it was just a really cool thing, and being a global citizen. So yeah, so it's just that curiosity per se, and then just wanting to have fun and do things a bit differently. So
right, I think this is time to close the sessions. I really thank you for sharing your exciting journey with us, and I hope your success continue. And personally, I'm really enjoying your talks and glad to meet you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And also, thanks for everyone who attend the sessions. And 2 weeks after December 9th, we're going to have another guest speaker, and Dr. Moshe Shahbazi for CGQ. And I hope I'm going to continue to see many of you at the next webinar. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you so much. Bye.